Hey historians, welcome to Decoding the Test and a quick look at the Civil Rights Movement. Now as always, what we're going to look at today is not everything I would want you to know about this time period. If you want to guarantee a higher level score, make sure you know the details that you see on the slide in front of you. Instead, in this video, what we're going to look at is what the test is focused on again and again and again when it comes to the Civil Rights Movement. And that boils down to a few key areas: the Chicano movement, the Civil Rights Act, segregation, the approaches to the Civil Rights Movement, LBJ's Great Society, and the prior leaders of the Civil Rights Movement. But today, we're going to look at the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 actually clues you in on what it did just right there in the name, and for that we can be forever grateful. It's going to be about equality of the vote, guaranteeing that African Americans, Chicano Americans, just anyone has the right to vote, regardless of race, religion, age. It doesn't matter. It's going to basically reinforce what is already in the Constitution. Where is it in the Constitution? I'm glad you asked, because that's going to be a question they're going to ask on the test. The 15th Amendment, one of the Reconstruction Amendments, guarantees the right to vote regardless of race. The Voting Rights Act reinforced the 15th Amendment. And you might be asking, well, if we have the 15th Amendment, why would we need legislation to reinforce that? I mean, we've got a constitutional amendment. What else do you need? It's a great question. In the South, they had passed a series of laws, sometimes known as black codes, more often known as Jim Crow laws, that basically found ways to get around the 15th Amendment. That included having poll taxes. Basically, if you want to vote, you had to pay for it at the polling. And it was highly unlikely that African Americans in the South, sharecropping African Americans who were living day to day, were going to be able to afford a poll tax. But you're also going, but wouldn't white farmers also not be able to afford it? Ah, you're right. White farmers wouldn't have to pay a poll tax. Why? Because of laws like the grandfather clause. You would be immune or exempt from paying a poll tax if your grandfather had been a registered voter. Well, for most white farmers, that would make them eligible without paying a tax. But for African American sharecroppers, their grandfathers at this time period were more than likely either slaves or had never voted. So it was a way of kind of being sneaky. And there were less subtle ways of being sneaky, including having the police basically set up in front of the polling station to intimidate African American voters just not to show up. Because the police at the time, especially in the South, were heavily involved in reinforcing segregation, sometimes brutally, often brutally. So the police were not usually seen as upholders of justice if you were African Americans. If you saw them at the polls, you knew that if you tried to force your right to vote, even if you could pay a poll tax, you'd probably get in trouble. So what are you going to get on the test? Well, you're going to get the 15th Amendment as the predecessor to the Voting Rights Act. The 15th Amendment guaranteeing everyone, no matter the race, the right to vote. The Voting Rights Act reinforced it by doing what? Well, look at the question in front of you. It's mentioning poll taxes, it's mentioning voter intimidation, and it's going, hey, the passage of legislation to end these practices resulted in what? Again, this is the test being sneaky. We've talked about this in video after video. Sometimes it just won't name that proper noun that would kind of give it away. There's not going to say the passage of the Voting Rights Act. It wants you to recognize that the Voting Rights Act ended poll taxes and voter identification. It wants you to know all these things. What's the result of that? Boop, boop, boop. Answer choice F. An increase in political participation by minorities. So, let's reiterate. What do you need to know? The 15th Amendment guaranteed everyone the right to vote, regardless of race. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 reinforces that. How? By making it illegal to have any of those tricky workarounds of the Jim Crow laws in the South. No more poll taxes, no more voter intimidation, no more grandfather clauses. there's no questions, comments, or screams of angst. I will see you in the next video.